Hello, everyone. I'm Elizabeth Corey, and I'm the founder of BeatingTrauma.com. And I'm here today to talk to you about resistance writing in particular. And you may be going, what in the world is resistance writing? And I really, it's interesting because I actually talk about resistance writing all the time. I maybe just don't call it that, but it shows up probably in almost every single live stream I do. And I was inspired today by a client call that I was having. And I was like, you know what? I need to say a little bit more, probably all the time, about this idea of resistance writing. Because it is such an important part of this journey. And to be honest, it's one of the most concrete ways, in my personal opinion, that we can use emotional journaling. Because I'll be honest, a lot of times it is kind of, abstract, or it really requires us to do a lot of grounding to connect with the messaging. And we aren't always sure where it's going, and I'll be honest, a lot of times when we are controller and mesh, which most of us are, we really need a goal. Like, we need somewhere that we're heading. Right? Like, that's very important to us most of the time as human beings, because we are so enmeshed with that controller who's very goal oriented and very external focused. So it needs a direction, and needs a clear direction. It needs to know where every single step is going to be taking us, 5-10 years down the road. That's a very typical controller response. And it's like that for a reason. The controller cannot stand unpredictability. They cannot stand inconsistency, because those kind of environments are where a lot of abuse has a tendency to happen. It's also where a lot of amazing things can happen, but not in the environments we grew up in. That was not what was happening. So we're going to talk a little bit about resistance writing today, and how it can kind of give us a little bit more of a concrete solution. It's still a process, right? It usually does not provide us with an immediate answer, but every once in a while it actually can. So I don't want to rule that possibility out either. I actually labeled this live stream today, the resistance writing, the fountain of success. So sort of like the fountain of youth. Nobody really knows about it, and nobody's really doing it. If we were to start doing this regularly, it would actually have a really huge impact in the long term on what our life looks like and the things we need to do in our life, like accomplishments, success. And that, by the way, includes financial success, which is a big part of what the controller actually wants. So, but, let's talk a little bit more about this term resistance writing, because I'll be honest, it can be difficult to embrace resistance writing for quite a few reasons, and I'm going to talk about those. But the most important one is that it goes against this idea of positive thinking. So positive thinking and intentioning is something that the self-help world today is really all about, right? They're like, I heard this morning at the radio, have a attitude of gratitude. Okay, there's nothing wrong with that at all. The problem is that those things can't work entirely on their own. They can't exist in a vacuum. We have to do other things other than just positive thinking and intentioning. If we are using positive intentioning and positive thinking to block what else is there, then it becomes toxic, right? So we don't want to do that. But when we combine these things, it can be actually highly effective in our lives. And that's really that's why I said fountain of success, right? Resistance writing is a fountain of success because it is highly effective in moving us towards our goals when we use both. When we only use one, unless it's resistance writing, if we only use the intentioning, it isn't getting us where we want to go, because we aren't addressing the resistance within ourselves, right? So how do we fix that? Well, the first thing we do is that when we focus on a goal, right, we would then, or an intention or something positive, we would then write from anything within us that is resisting that goal. Okay. And you might be saying, well, I don't have any resistance. It's a goal of mine, so of course I want it. And it's true on a conscious level. The problem is there is actually a lot of unconscious resistance to almost anything in our lives where we are struggling to make it happen. Okay. That whole idea that if it is meant to be, it will be easy. Yeah, that's not true at all. If it's meant to be and we have no resistance at all to it, it might be easy. But that's not how it works. That's not what happens in life, right? And ironically, we will actually have resistance to the resistance writing. I know you're going, okay, this is getting ridiculous, but we really, I'm the controller, but they're going to sound something like this. Writing is dangerous because people might see it, right? And they will really be very tricky about this. They will try to keep us away from writing by making us feel really nervous that other people are going to see it. There are about 1,000 ways to stop people from seeing our writing, but we kind of get stuck on this idea, oh, somebody's going to see it somehow. And we don't really look for what may be out there that could help us to write and also keep that writing safe. Or even though this isn't my favorite solution, destroying that writing afterwards is an option for us. And what I like to tell people is if your options are write and destroy it or don't write, then definitely pick the first one 100% of the time, right? So, but writing from the controller when they say somebody's going to see this and they're going to judge you, you're going to get in trouble, whatever it may be that shows up. The next one is that writing won't help me. Or if you've already tried writing, you might be hearing writing doesn't help me. Like it's not going to work for me. Okay. This is another big one the controller will try to use. And if you have tried writing in the past, maybe, a lot of times the controller will let you try it like a couple of times and say, see, it's doing nothing. Because writing is a long-term investment. It often isn't going to show up noticeably, like the benefit of it isn't going to show up noticeably after we write a couple times. So the controller will take advantage of that and they'll say, see, it doesn't work for you, right? Also, typically when we start writing, the initial writing is going to be a bit heady, as I like to say. It's going to be cognitive. Going to be coming from this part of the brain. That kind of writing is not as beneficial as emotional journaling, but it's a starting place. And a lot of times it's where we have to start. So we need to allow the writing to exist on a relatively consistent basis, despite that the controller is saying it's not going to work. That takes some real awareness and some real awareness of what our defenders may be telling us. The last one, these are all examples, by the way, there's probably hundreds, but I'm giving some of the ones I see the most. This one comes directly from the toxic positivity messages. It is, if I give it attention, it will come true. Okay. I hear this one all the time. It's like, I can't write from the resistance because I've been told by 1 million people and 1,000 books that if I give it attention, it is going to happen, right? That is not true. I am here to tell you that is not an accurate statement. As a matter of fact, when we allow our resistance to write, it begins to release it from our system. Now, if we just consistently spin about it in our heads all day long, like, nope. Yes, that is the kind of attention that can make things happen. But when we are writing, there is something that is happening within us that helps that resistance to release itself. It ties it in with the emotions that are associated with it, packages it up, and lets it leave. One of the things I like to say all the time in this work is nothing's gonna leave until it's heard. So oftentimes the resistance is sitting there because you haven't heard it yet, not because you haven't ignored it long enough, which is often what we hear, right? That's not the truth, right? So yes, we should write from the resistance about resistance writing. I know this stuff can get a little wonky when I start talking about it like that. So I just want to go back and read what Jan is saying. My experience has been the depth of my resistance to writing is always equal to the height of the reward of relief, awareness, release, and personal wisdom. Each and every time. Irony is, why do I resist this incredible reward? And this is such an important point that Jan is making here. Absolutely. The resistance level definitely goes up when there is the most to gain, because what we are gaining usually looks like change, right? It changes how we are in the world. It changes what we do. It reduces survival skills. It reduces that kind of intense, living in the world from an incredibly overdone nervous system, right? It starts to bring those things down. And while we know that feels good, the controller is still in a place where they believe that if they don't have those survival skills, we're not going to survive, right? I mean, it's plain and simple. This is life or death for the controller. So the resistance to the change is the controller's panic about what happens if you don't do what they think you have to do to survive. And oftentimes the change we get from writing stops some of those behaviors, stops some of those survival mechanisms in their track. And kind of to the controller, that leaves us very vulnerable to bad things. So yes, the resistance goes up dramatically when the result is going to be particularly good for us. That is true. And I know it's like so frustrating, but when you look at it from the controller's perspective, they don't see how you're going to make it without keeping those exact skills and mechanisms in place at all times. So they're going to really resist considering another way of being on this planet. There's no doubt about it. So let's talk about an example of resistance writing in action. Okay. So what does this mean? So we need to start by thinking of a goal, right? Not necessarily like a controller goal. Like, I'm not talking necessarily about like SMART goals, although there are plenty of controller goals that are grounded. So we really have to look at, is this a grounded goal or is this an ungrounded goal? Because controllers will have goals that are meant for the purposes of keeping us busy, keeping us distracted, doing what society tells us. Those are our ungrounded goals. But if you really look deeply at who you are and what you have always wanted, there's usually something that is significantly evasive to us over the course of our lives. And the longer we're on this planet, the more that thing will feel really frustrating that we haven't been able to attain it. So we want to think of something like that. Now, I have two examples of what that goal might look like and what on the surface we might be hearing around that goal. This is resistance, but it's often a bit disguised. The first one is you can think of something you have always wanted to do, but never done. So those fears have a tendency to look like they're about time, money, or just goals in general, like, productivity. Okay. So these resistance points will sound very logical, but in fact, these resistance points are highly based in fear. And we'll talk more about some of those in a minute. Then another example could be it's something you've aspired to, but you've never really been able to attain. The fears behind the resistance in this case may be a little bit more geared towards, so it's something that you don't deserve, for example. Okay. So then we will use this goal, whatever this goal is, and then I get it that the goal alone can be really hard to find and piece together. As you work with this more, you'll start to get in touch with more of what it is you want, right? Like our first goal when we do this process may not be something that's super grounded or super purposeful or connected to our creativity or our strengths, but it's a place to start and it's a step on the journey, right? So we use this goal as a target and then we write from the resistance. So what I want to give you guys next is some of the biggest points of resistance that I have heard over the years that really impact our ability to kind of hit that goal target, that thing that we want. And when I say goal target, I also want to be clear that a lot of what we want isn't so easily defined, which of course automatically ups our resistance level from the controller because they're like, we can't define that, so we can't move towards it. And that in and of itself is a resistance point that we may be facing. So I'm going to tell you some resistance. Now, if any of these really resonate with you, write them down, write down the points. So you can come back to them and use them as resistance writing. And yes, you will need to be quite repetitive about this writing. The goal is not just to pull out the language that says these are the beliefs that are not serving me. The goal is also to pull out the evidence associated with that language. That means it can be things like memories, it can be experiences we haven't processed the emotions about, right? This is an emotional process that we're going to go down here. So it's important to recognize this doesn't mean I'm going to write from my resistance using each one of these prompts one time and then my goal is going to happen. No, it's not going to. That's why it's so hard to fight the defenders on this stuff when they start saying why, it's not working for you. Because sometimes, yes, it does feel like it's not really. So the first example I want to give you is quite simple, and it is just, I will do this later. Now, it isn't as simple as that. It isn't just, I will do this later. There's actually a lot of complex behaviors happening behind that phrase. And most of them are going to look like some form of distraction, okay? So I'll do this later. I have other things that are more important right now. And the controller will then pick out a whole bunch of tasks that you need to do right now instead of doing this thing or working towards this thing, right? And they're very convincing. They don't pick ridiculous things. They pick things that it's very easy for us to go, well, yeah, like I do need to get that done. It'll always seem very, very valid. And then they will distract you from the thing. And honestly, one of the things I like to say about the controller is their goal is distract, 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 die. They just want to get you to the end of life without doing whatever it is that's going to break down a survival skill. Okay, so it won't always be really obvious that they're pushing back on you because they know if they say something like, do this thing, that's going to call them out. You're going to see them when they start to be that direct. So they use distraction as one of their primary methods. But you will hear over and over again, I'll do that after I do this other thing. I'll do this once I'm finished with that. I'll do this later, but I have to do this first. And in this case, it's great to write from it, but you're going to be battling against the controller saying, no, we don't have time to work on the goal or write from it right now because those dishes have to be done first, right? That's just an example. This is where we flip the script. And when I talk about flipping the script with my clients, it can make a very substantial difference in their journey. What we do in that case is we say, I'm going to take 5 minutes to write from my resistance, and then I'm going to wash the dishes. So we flip it. We say, yes, I know, controller, you want me to do those dishes first, but I'm going to write first. This usually brings up a fair amount of controller tantruming, and that can be excellent writing. So that's what we want to try. So that's the first one. The rest of these are a little bit less complex, although they will show up in a lot of different ways in our system. So the next prompt is probably the second most popular controller tactic, and that is that there is no time or money for this thing. Whatever this thing is, whatever goal this is, it's probably going to need from you either time or money. There's almost nothing in the world that we could do that doesn't need one of those two things. And the controller knows that. So they keep the focus on there's no time, there's no money, And honestly, this is probably one of the biggest things that stops us in our tracks from doing what we ultimately want to do in this world. And again, it can sound highly, highly logical, especially in the world we live in today, which is full of messages about optimizing time and making as much money as you can and not spending frivolously. We hear these messages all the time. And that comes to the next writing prompt, which is it's irresponsible. It's irresponsible to do this because it's going to take too much time and too much money. And I need to use my time and money to do logical, rational, responsible things, which, by the way, never really got anyone any closer to what it is that they would like to do or to being their most authentic self. Generally speaking, it is pretty irrational steps that move us in that direction. I'll be honest. At least irrational based on the world we live in today and how we define rational and logical in this world today, right? And that's because we're almost all controller enmeshed. So that's why. I will say that most of the amazing decisions I have made in the last 10 years that have impacted my life in really just glorious ways have not made any logical sense. Most people around me didn't think they were a good idea, to the point where I just sort of stopped sharing things with people because they were creating too much dissonance in my system. So, yes, these are going to be some of your primary resistance points. And even if you're like, yeah, that's right. Like, you may be thinking to yourself, I'm totally in agreement with those statements. Like, I see them as the accurate perspective in this situation. Write from them anyway. Because as you write from them, sometimes it lets you see that it's like not your adult self. It's actually a part stepping forward like the controller. So give that a little bit of writing. Elka's saying, I hate that I resist writing. I don't, the fourth alone and miserable in, oh, okay, yeah. I spent the fourth alone and miserable instead of enjoying my art projects and writing. I'm starting to dislike myself. It makes little sense. Okay. So the disliking yourself is actually probably your freedom fighters or your inner children disliking your controller and karma kid for blocking you. So I'll just throw that out there. And that can also be some really great writing to do, right from the parts that hate the parts that are blocking. I do that often, and it's very helpful. But yes, it is often the defense that's coming in because they are so scared of what you're going to unearth when you start resistance writing and doing what it is you want to do. There's defenders in your system that are highly scared of the changes you're going to make in your life when you do that. It does require quite a bit of force when we're in that place, and it's not easy to get at. It's really not. I struggle with this all the time, especially as I'm creating and writing a lot around books and things right now. It can hit you like a ton of bricks. And one resistance point that you may get is just a very simple, what's the point? What's the point? What's the goal of this? This isn't going to work. It's not going to get us anywhere. And this can come with a really strong, futile emotion, which makes it really effective at what it's doing. If we can recognize that what's the point, that futility is in fact a way of shutting down something that will actually be quite effective if we can move past it, is very, very helpful. And we recognize that more when we are writing from the messaging than when we're just hearing it or thinking about it or listening to it. It's just, it helps for whatever reason. It helps. So, and this is where we're transitioning into like coming out of more controller strategies and more into some of those karma kid strategies where futility and shame are sort of at the basis of the resistance points. Now, both of those parts are going to be heavily fearful. So fearful will be there as well, or the fear will be there as well. But futility and shame are often coming from the karma kid who has contracts and says, you're not allowed to do these things. Like those contracts actually say that. So it's very, very intense resistance in those situations. Another one that we may hear is it's selfish to consider this, right? It's selfish. Others don't get to do this. Why do you? So that's another karma kid one. The next one focuses on age, and I know we've all heard this, which is you're too old to do that. But the other split of it may be that, oh, you could do that, but just wait till retirement. Like, because now we need to focus on making money and spending our time on whatever we're doing outside of retirement. They don't intend for you to have time to do it in retirement, by the way, but they'll tell you that. Again, that delay tactic I talked about earlier. Some of the other things you might hear is if you haven't done it by now, why bother? And then we get into kind of some of the more unworthiness, the stuff that says that goal isn't for you, you're unworthy of that goal, that's for other people. You don't have talent for that. You don't have the skills for that. That's going to be heavy-duty karma kid stuff. But I will say there are elements of the controller, especially if the perfectionist stuff starts to pop up. The controller will say if you can't do it perfect, then you can't do it. So there is that element as well. So these are some resistance points I want you to try and see what you can find in your own system that resists the very thing you actually want. Sometimes you may even want it desperately, but can't seem to get past all of this defender stuff. Sort of like what Elka was talking about. Like, I really wanted to do this today and I didn't do it. These are some things that could help you. But yes, if the resistance is to writing, you will have to force it a little bit. Unfortunately, you'll have to push really hard to get the writing in, at least at first, or for a little while until you get past whatever that defensive cycle is. So that's what I have for you today. I hope you found this helpful. Resistance writing has changed my life, truly changed it. And I would keep talking about this if I didn't have to go right now for a client call because I love this topic so much. So give it a try it out. And I really appreciate you guys being here and for commenting. If I didn't get to your comment, I will get to your comment in writing. And thank you all so much. I will talk to you next Tuesday, same time, same place. Thank you all.